episode of Peephole Pictures, we're looking at Midnight Desires from 1976.
What happened when these two worldly people went visiting one Sunday?
I'd like you both to meet my wife, Elaine.
Hello, it's Shaun.
Elaine.
It's so nice to meet you at last, Jonathan.
I just try to do the best job I can with the equipment I have.
I bet you're very well equipped.
He and I are both very good bridge players.
Oh, yes?
And what about the strange headline? 37 years late.
It's happened just as I expected.
No, they didn't bolt or run. They held their ground.
We almost have this deep need to be punished.
It's Midnight Desires. When these four sophisticated people get together and exchange their fantasies, anything is likely to happen.
Hey, this is a post-recording correction. A couple times I say that Eric Edwards' character is married to C.J. Lange's character, when in actuality I meant to say that he was married to Jenny Baxter's character. So I do apologize. Anytime you hear that, just adjust accordingly. Okay, enjoy the episode. From writer-director Shaun Costello, most known for some of his more notorious work like Forced Entry and Water Power, we have Midnight Desires from 1976, starring Jamie Gillis, Eric Edwards, C.J. Lange, and Jenny Baxter. Looking at the recently released Quality X Blu Ray, and that title is really appropriate for what they're doing. It's all X and it's all quality, man. I've really not been disappointed with a release of theirs so far. They've been doing really exceptional work, and this was a first time watch for me. I think this was a title that I had known, or at least had heard about, but I was pretty unaware of it. So like I mentioned before, this is written and directed by Shaun Costello, and this is something of a tale of stories, really. Multiple different stories here. We have these two couples getting together at this big kind of elaborate bourgeois mansion. We have Eric Edwards married to, who was it before? Let me get the name up here, to Jenny Baxter, and we have Jimmy Gillis married to C.J. Lange, and they're sitting around by the fire. They have an older kind of butler who's bringing over these various kind of headlines of newspapers that are saying things like, oh, Hitler invades Poland, and invasion imminent, and all this, to sort of ambivalent reactions from Jamie. But where the eroticism of the film comes from is that they sit around and they all kind of talk about their deepest sort of desires and fantasies, whether that be a sort of menage a trois or something to do more with kind of BDSM, sadistic kind of stuff like that. They go around talking about their desires and their fantasies, and we go back to them in the living room or in this kind of living area talking about sort of the implications of these different fantasies from one another. The location for this film is really good. I was listening to the commentary on this with Shaun Costello, and I think he said that he rented out this place for something like $1,500 or so. I mean, they pull up at the start in a limousine, they go right in, and it's funny because I don't know how furnished this place was previously, but they first walk in, that's Eric Edwards and Jenny Baxter, and it's a really great kind of wide shot, but it doesn't look like there's a lot of furniture there. It was bizarre because they walk into this sort of greeting area, but there's like a lot of open space there in a way that was really noticeable. And then where primarily the film takes place, at least when it cuts back to them in general discussion, was filmed in a different location. I don't know if that was filmed in New York or not, or at least I don't know if this was filmed in Long Island or not, but it's pretty noticeable even before I knew that, because it's a very everything looks a little bit more cramped, and it's just kind of funny how you have this wide open kind of location in the previous scenes, and then here you have this something more kind of tight in, where it's really just kind of one fixed camera shot looking at them on the couch, but it's actually very well framed, and above all else, one of the highlights of this film, I would say one of the biggest highlights of the film, is really the camera work and the direction from Shaun Costello. This was the first film that he shot on 35mm, and the film looks really good. I don't know if it's because I'm watching this on a new TV. I'd recently replaced my TV, and I don't know if it's because of that, but a lot of the wide shots in this I thought looked really crisp. And in part that could be due to the restoration, of course, but it was something that really stood out, even with a lot of the close-ups. It all just came together really well. And the different types of camera angles and camera shots that he's using is really, really something to marvel at, because it's sort of like he'll cut from one of my favorite shots in the film at the very beginning when the limousine pulls up to the mansion. It comes towards the camera and it looks something of a not quite a fisheye lens, but it almost feels like that in a way where it feels so wide. And then it'll cut to them walking into the house, and then you have that overhead shot of just this really open, wide shot to kind of have this real kind of spatial awareness. And that's what the film does really well. It's constantly doing these different, really great camera shots, camera angles, whether they be fixed, whether they be handheld, walking around. And you can kind of see that in a lot of Shaun Costello's work. If I'm looking back to something like Forced Entry, which I talked about on the Cozy Corner of Cinema not too long ago, and just sort of, I didn't point it out there, but in relation to that film, watching this, it becomes a lot more apparent of when he decides to use close-ups, handheld shots, under shots that are looking from above, or I'm sorry, that are looking above from underneath. Like the first real sex scene of the film has a really great shot that's looking up from the ground, and it's the first one with C.J. Lang, where she is with these couple of guys, and it's really kind of stark in a way that you notice it. You're like, my gosh, man. The choice of camera work in this film is terrific. And then going for something, and then in that same sequence, even before we get to that, we have this great shot of her in this white kind of room with this fog around. We cut from an overhead shot to like a real tight close-up, and the editing as well, which was also edited by Costello, is terrific, man. One shot in particular that really, really stood out, which was just seamless, like butter, man. She's like kind of hobbling around this room, bouncing off the walls. She's got these chains on her, and then she stands up, goes from the bottom of the frame up, and then the doors open behind her to this kind of, these guys are wearing these cloaks, and it's very like, in this foggy kind of room, it's like almost like Eyes Wide Shut in a way, sort of reminds you with the guys with these cloaks and all that. And it's very ominous, and it's very kind of speculative. It's very cool, man. Get to the shot from looking from above the ground. She's kissing these guys' fists. It's very kind of domineering sort of way. It's all really, really well done in a way where even if you're not thinking about it, you're noticing, wow, this wasn't just put together overnight. I mean, this was really the attention to detail with what he's choosing to frame and not to frame is great. And you have certain shots of close-ups, when she's pleasuring these guys, the fact that it'll get into a really kind of tight close-up and then continually cut from there. I think I said this before when I was talking about Stud Hunters, but I think that's one of the things that you can really notice from a strong adult filmmaker is oftentimes the camera work and the editing, because you see so many adult films where it'll be a fixed camera shot, and all the action will happen in frame. And I know I talked about Stud Hunters, but I'm saying it more so here because it's relevant and to the context of what I'm talking about. But all of it, man, is just knowing what he wants to put in the frame, where it feels almost like kind of claustrophobic at times, but also incredibly erotic as well. The way that it's all put together, it feels very artistic, and it feels very matter of fact with a lot of the fast kind of editing back and forth. Like they cut from one sequence with her, kind of pleasuring these guys, and then it'll have this sort of like rapid cut into a different sequence with these guys like whipping her, and she enjoys being like dominated by them. It'll cut to like what is it? I do apologize. I don't know what it's called. When you have your hands and your head locked into like the wooden sort of, I don't know what the hell it's called, man. It's very embarrassing. I'm sure it's a very obvious name. But the editing of that, where she's in it and then she's not in it, and you can tell it's probably not a huge set because they're filling a lot of the background with fog. But at the same time, it works so well because of what's in the foreground is what's primarily important. That you're not even thinking about like, okay, this is probably in like a small kind of enclosed area. This is really just so well done in its own right. And we have these, like I said before, that's just one of the segments on there. I'm not going to go through each and every one, but I want to point out something because each of the segments feel so uniquely different, and the tones as well feel so uniquely different, because then you have the second one, which is, and I know I'm contradicting myself there. I'm saying I'm not going through them, and here I am going through them as well. You have a great sequence with a threesome with Eric Edwards, Brie Anthony, and Ellen Burden. And it's funny because the whole sequence, there's like a cat on the end of the bed. And they don't, he doesn't address it in the commentary, but I'm very curious. I'm like, was that cat just there, man? I mean, at first, when it starts out, it's like trying to get out of the room. Keep an eye on it. It's like by the door, and then it'll cut. And then the cat's like on the bed, man. I don't know if that's intentional, like what if they're just like, well, we got the cat here, that's one thing. But even the way it's all framed and set up, again, you have this foggy kind of atmosphere to create this sort of dreamlike quality for these love sequences. But you have, the both of them are will be naked, and then you have. I forgot who it was. It was, gosh, I just had the page up right here. I do apologize. We have another character kind of walk in, fully dressed as this like magician, or this sort of like just full kind of like suit and tie and all that. That does have this feel like, I say a dreamlike quality in a way where it almost kind of plays out like a dream in a way. And another notable thing about this sequence is that, so this was released in 1976 as well, the same year as Radley Metzger's The Opening of Misty Beethoven. And I know that, I mean, I don't know when it comes to like pegging in a lot of these films. I don't know how early it kind of dates. I know that the opening Misty Beethoven is sort of, I don't know if it is the earliest or one of the earliest, but it's the fact of the matter is that these were both 1976. I don't know which one was released first. I mean, I imagine they're probably filmed around the same time or so, but it's interesting the fact that it's not something that you really commonly see in films like this, especially subverting expectations, where you have, Eric Edwards doing his thing, and then we have this other kind of like out of left field sort of, now we're doing this into this sort of not even quite gonzo, but at least something more uncommon that you'd see, because the sequence itself, primarily, besides the foggy kind of quality and besides the sort of outfits, it plays out traditionally. Eric Edwards is doing his thing. Shaun, he's like working on her body and all that from the bottom to the top, and then you have that, and it's sort of like, wow, okay. And then even with that, talking about the camera work before, we have these great kind of up close shots that really, that they don't linger on it too much, because that's another thing that oftentimes can be sort of frustrating, is when you just have these shots that really kind of linger on, and it doesn't really feel like there's a lot of artistic sort of placement of these edits or these shots. But here it does it so well, where Shaun knows how long to linger on these when it gets to the end of this sequence, to kind of show that and revel in it, but not overdo it, and to create a very kind of consistent sort of sensual flow that you'd normally kind of take for granted, but here it completely works well. And as well, the tones, man. I mean, that's what I'm talking about before, is that we have that previous sequence, so that the first vignette, where you have this sort of BDSM, sort of masochistic sort of vibe, and here you get a loving, but then also kind of a domineering sort of vibe, which moves into the third Jamie Gillis sort of vignette, and that's a perfect kind of opportunity to bring up something that I wanted to mention before, is that, Shaun is writing these sequences sort of attuned to the actors themselves. You have C.J. Lang, who wanted to be in a more kind of dominated sort of position, and you have, in this sequence, you have Jamie Gillis, who is, is working out in this gym, a lot of handheld sort of camera work here, and I think naturally in films themselves, when you see like handheld kind of camera work, it generally has what feels but to be a more realistic sort of vibe. If you watch sort of like a smaller independent film and you see a lot of it being handheld, you kind of let the actors like sort of do their thing and not be bound to this one particular frame. So even if they get out of frame, or it's not totally perfect, or it's at an angle, that's what kind of makes it feel more real and feel more loose. But the way that whole sequence plays out is that you also have one of the greats, Vanessa Del Rio, in there. And you have this sequence that starts off as this, kind of, back and forth in the gym, and then gets into something kind of more darker, sort of attuned to sort of something you would expect to see Jamie in. But it all works very well, and the way that it kind of, the camera goes from this main gym area all the way around this locker room area, I mean, it's all done super well, and I think this is probably the highlight of the film when it comes to showing off the editing, where you have this, a couple of guys with Vanessa Del Rio, that'll constantly sort of edit back to Jamie with this punching bag. And even talked about before when I mentioned Force Entry, you have those sequences in that film when you have these sort of violent sexual sequences, and then it'll cut to like Vietnam footage, kind of interspersed in between. And that's one of Shaun Costello's really highlights as a filmmaker, is that camera work and that editing of having these really kind of rapid cuts. It has this really cool, this really consistent sort of flow to it that you can watch it as a traditional film, or if you're watching it as something more erotic, which is, I imagine that a lot of the audience members, that's where they're going to see this for that reason. That is still, it can work in both ways. Oftentimes that is taken for granted, but this sequence is done incredibly well. I also got to say one thing as well: the music as well is something to be brought up. It's funny because I didn't notice this at first, but he says that a lot of the music in this was stolen. Like he says, the opening kind of music was taken from The Last Tango in Paris, and the last sequence, the last vignette with Jenny Baxter was taken from Barry Lyndon. I didn't know any of this, and I'm curious if the same kind of if it is still the same music on the in this release, because I know oftentimes a big reason why a lot of films aren't able to come to a new release is for music rights issues. That's a whole other kind of field right there as well. But even speaking with the last sequence before, it's a different piece altogether. It doesn't just feel like, okay, we have like this one location and we're going to try to dress it up to these different sort of sceneries. I mean, with this, you have a gym setting. In the previous vignette, you have a bedroom. In the first one, you have this this like sanitarium that turns into this foggy kind of dungeon. And then the last one, you have like this this period piece sort of setting. We have the actors are on horses and they have like real kind of period era costumes. But then you still have the love sequence there. You still have the fantasy sequence, and it all ties together really well. I mean, I apologize. He said the budget at one point. I totally forgot to write it down. But I mean, for a film like this to have these different locations and to have kind of all out sort of different settings and all that, you can really kind of see the hard work and effort that really went into this. And Shaun speaks very highly of this film. He's very proud of this film, and I think he has every right to be, because even with the in-between sequences, the dialogue here is very strong. I really like a lot of the early on with a lot of the long takes that you'll have with CJ Lang, where she's rattling off a lot of this dialogue, and she says it, and she's very convincing in the way that she does it, and I really like everybody kind of coming together and bouncing this dialogue off one another to kind of give some sort of contextualizations to each of their fantasies. Because that's one thing as well that it should be noted, is that the time that it takes between the love sequences is really phenomenal. Because even with the film first starting out, there's still, I can actually look here. It's not, the first sex doesn't happen in the film until about... Well, the first nudity is about 12 minutes in, and then after that, you're about 13 minutes in. So you have 13 solid minutes of all just set up of them all getting together. And with that, you have the advantage of like one of the running joke in the film is that the butler is walking over, handing Jamie these newspaper headlines, and his reaction is so funny. I said it before that I think Jamie, even though he was known for one kind of like, more sort of rough style with a lot of these films, at least a lot of the sequences that he was being in, and especially with a lot of the later kind of Gonzo stuff. I think that Jamie is such an underappreciated comedic actor, because like I love him in High Rise. He's like that first sequence that he's in where he's laying on the couch. And he's like reading from this paper, and the way that he's saying this dialogue is so funny. And even here, and actually, speaking of recent titles, when you have like Melusine putting out Blonde Ambition, his whole sequence in that where he's playing the director and he's like yelling at the crew, he's so good in those. It's sort of like I think he could have easily, he's a guy who could have just been in just a traditional sort of Hollywood comedy, and he would have done very well. I say that he reminds me of Elliot Gould, and not just in the way of the fact that he looks like Elliot Gould, but he has this very sarcastic, kind of dry tone to a lot of his statements, where you can't tell if he's being sarcastic or if he's just like, if he's like Bill Murray, he's just messing with you and all that. I really think that he could have had that real sort of crossover appeal, because he was such a charismatic actor, whether in a lead or in a supporting role. And when he's reacting to these news headlines early on, it says like Hitler invades Poland, and he's very blasé about it. He's like, it's classic, like the way that he can deliver just this exact dialogue is just so enjoyable and is so funny. What I was saying before is that the film takes its time in between all of the sex, and that all works just as well. For a film like this, what's the runtime on this? It's an hour 13 minutes. The pace in this is really brisk. There's not a dull moment in this, man, because it's constantly moving, and the sex scenes are constantly. They're constantly well edited, so it's constantly moving, it's constantly going. Because sometimes when you watch these, you can feel the pacing on them, especially during the sex sequences or the love sequences, whatever you want to call them. Here, it moves along greatly because you're having these different camera angles, these different camera shots, this tight editing, really enjoyable performances throughout. And then when you get to the end, it ends on a comedic note, and you feel satisfied as a viewer. The eroticism is there, undoubtedly. But also as a film, it's just a very enjoyable film, and really just one of my favorite things I've discovered from Quality X. As for the features on this release, we have, it's a little light, but that's still good because we have a new audio commentary with director Shaun Costello, moderated by Joe Rubin. And that's a very enjoyable commentary because Joe Rubin is trying to look more into the film from the contextual point of view from different films of the time and different technical aspects. And you can tell that Shaun is not really as interested in that. He's more just about like, I don't know what you mean by that. Or he's just watching the film. He's saying like, yeah, you go, girl. This is great watching it. And then he's like, oh, I guess we're at the end. He seems like a real kind of a funny guy to like kind of watch these films with. And I think Joe Rubin does. They both actually bounce off each other fairly well. There is some there is a lot of silence and like open-ended silences that maybe could have been a bit tighter, but when it comes to general conversations, I know that it can be kind of tricky with that. But I think that it's a really solid commentary, as well as you have the theatrical trailer, the image gallery, which is just again like screenshots from the film, as well as some ad listings and all that, subtitles. And it also says from newly scanned and restored in 2K from a 35mm answer print, as well as a disc being region free. And on the inside, we have a little booklet that is just the posters, the various posters of the film, ads, the synopsis, and all that. Which is funny because on the poster, I don't even know who this person is, and I think this person in lingerie is supposed to be Vanessa Del Rio, but it doesn't look a thing like her. It just looks like anybody. It's sort of like they just kind of had this artwork. They had a mansion in the background, and they went, "All right, do it." And there's a dude with sunglasses on. I don't know who the hell this guy is, but hey, you want to have fun. But solid release overall, man. I think that the restoration on this looks great. It helps that it's shot really well. The commentary is good. I think this is just a really solid release overall. Quality X is really just one of they're becoming. I mean, in part with DistroPix, they're becoming one of the strongest sort of companies right now. I mean, I'm really looking forward to whatever they're putting out, and even the titles I don't own from them yet. If I see that they're ones who put it out, I'm like, oh, cool. And if you're curious, this is release number 8 by them. I think I have all of their releases. I'm not sure. I have to look at that. But if I don't own all of them, at least I own most of them because I do have quite a bit of Quality X titles. But overall, I really enjoyed this one. I would recommend this definitely, especially if you're a fan of Shaun Costello's more notorious work and you want something a little bit different, but still has that sort of dabbling in something more bizarre ish in a way kind of sexuality, then I think this one is really going to be for you if you think that's going to be up your alley. So very cool stuff. That's Midnight Desires, and that will be it for this episode of Peephole Pictures. Thank you guys for listening. I know these ones have been getting some pretty decent reviews, so leave your feedback below, or whether you like the film or dislike the film or anything like that. Any feedback is cool, man. So thank you so much for listening.